Hello Sewing Bees, I'm Sookie, and in today's video I'm going to teach you how to make 3 different projects in less than 10 minutes each for summer. So grab your machine and let's get stitching. First up is the Sunglass Case. It's got a sweet little curved petal top to it and it goes together really quick. You're going to need 2 pieces of cotton, one for the outside and one for the inside, that measure 7 by 8.5 inches tall or 18 centimeters by 22 centimeters. You'll also need a piece of thin batting that measures 7 by 8.5 inches tall or 18 centimeters by 22 centimeters. Decide which piece you want for the outside and place it wrong sides together with the batting. And place the inside right sides together with the outside, and you're going to fold it in half widthwise. And we're going to just take our fabric shears and make a slight curve on the upper 2 corners. Now with your straight pins, you're going to pin all the way around through all the layers, except you're going to leave an opening at the bottom center. At the bottom, you're going to leave about a 3-inch opening. And the way that I like to indicate my opening, so that I don't accidentally sew over it, is to mark with double pins. Now let's head to the sewing machine, and with a regular straight stitch, we're going to sew at 1/4 inch seam allowance. Back stitch at the beginning where that opening is, and stitch all the way off the material, and clip your threads. And stitch with the 1/4 inch seam allowance on the sides, following the shape of the outside. Remove your pins as you're stitching because you never want to accidentally stitch over a straight pin. It can break a needle, but it could also do some internal damage. Now when you get to the end, you're going to do the same thing by clipping your threads and cross over at the bottom. Back stitch at the very end, clip all of your thread tails, and then let's head back to the cutting space. On the lower corners, go ahead and miter them, but do not accidentally cut the stitching. And then with a pair of pinking shears, which are kind of like a zigzag effect that will cut through all the layers, you're going to cut all the way around the outside. When you do this, it just makes turning your eyeglass case right side out a lot easier, especially around those curves. Now give it a good press because every seam you stitch, you should also press it to help set the seam. Now we're going to turn our eyeglass case right side out, and if you have one of these handy dandy things, it's called an easy point and turner, you're going to clamp it on the inside and really easily turn your little eyeglass case right side out. Now with the pointy end of the easy point and turner, go ahead and get nice points in the corners, and you can also use it to smooth out the curves. Now tuck the opening seam allowance inside, and we're going to give our eyeglass case a good press. Now fold your eyeglass case in half widthwise and align the side seams and the bottom seam. And go ahead and connect them with some straight pins. We're going to be stitching over the side seam and the bottom, so make sure that everything's nice and aligned. Take your time and be really careful to make sure that you have all of the seam allowances tucked in at that opening at the center bottom. Now you're going to stitch on the side and the bottom. Now essentially what you're doing is top stitching through all of those layers. So just take your time because every machine is going to go through a little bit differently. Just be sure that you backstitch at the beginning and that you're stitching about 1/8 inch to 1/4 inch away from the side. And when you get to the bottom, same thing, just rotate your material and backstitch at the very end to secure your stitch. When you're finished, clip your threads. And there you go, my sewing bees. How easy was it to put that sunglass case together? I can't wait to see all the different ones that you make. Up next is the Drawstring Mesh Bag. And this, my sewing bees, is a perfect summer sewing project. You can put seashells and flip-flops and even wet swimsuits inside. Let's go ahead and review the materials that you're going to need for this bag. The first is a piece of mesh, 26 inches by 18 inches tall, or 66 centimeters by 45 centimeters tall. You will need a piece of cotton for your top band that measures 26 inches wide by 4 inches tall, or 66 centimeters wide by 10 centimeters tall. And 2 pieces of cotton for your casings that measures 10 inches wide by 2 inches tall, or 25 centimeters by 5 centimeters tall. And you will need 2 pieces 32 inches long for your drawstring. Now I used 5mm cording, but you could also use 1/2 inch wide ribbon. Begin by pressing your top casing with the wrong side facing up, and on each of the short ends you're going to fold in about 1/2 inch and give it a good press. Now you're going to fold it in half with wrong sides together along the entire length. And repeat the same process on your second casing. Folding in the short ends 1/2 inch on each side, and then folding it along the long edge with the wrong sides together, aligning the bottom 2 raw edges. Now take your top band, and on one of the long edges you're going to fold up 1/2 inch and give it a good press. Make sure that that 1/2 inch is facing the wrong side. Now fold your mesh in half widthwise and place a straight pin along the top edge. Now fold it in quarters, but with the short end you're going to go over about 1/2 inch, and then you're going to place a pin on that line as well, and repeat on the other side. That little 1/2 inch is essentially the 1/2 inch seam allowance we're going to be creating soon. Take one of your casings and fold it in half to find the center and place a straight pin. Align that straight pin with one of the quarter marks that you have at the top of your mesh, and now pin your casing with the raw edges aligned up with the top part of your mesh material, and repeat with the second casing. Make sure you pin all layers together. Now grab that top band, and the long edge that isn't folded is going to be stitched along the top edge of your mesh bag. So put right sides together, and basically you're going to sandwich those little casing pieces between the top band and the mesh, and just reposition all the straight pins so that everything is pinned nicely together. Now let's head to the sewing machine and sew through all those layers. Set your sewing machine up for a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and you're going to be stitching, and begin with a back stitch and stitch over all the layers. Make sure you remove your pins as you're sewing along. And when you get to the end, clip your thread tails. And now let's head back to the pressing station, and you're going to press that seam flat. Now turn your mesh bag to what would be the outside, and you're going to take that top band and pull it straight down. This is now going to be the outside of your mesh bag. And fold the seam nice and flat and give it a good press. Just kind of do what I call the roly-poly along that top seam, just kind of rolling the mesh and the cotton material so that it lays nice and flat. And now let's head back to the sewing machine to stitch along that top band. You want to sew a top stitch, so about 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch from the edge of the top band, you're going to be sewing through all layers. Now this would be a really great opportunity to use a decorative stitch, or maybe a different color thread, or a zigzag. Really just have some fun with it. A straight stitch will be durable enough though if you decide to do it. When you get to the very end, just back stitch and clip your threads. Now you're going to stitch a top stitch along the top edge. And it's going to be about 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch away from the true top edge, not the top casing. And you're going to be sewing through all the layers. And backstitch at the end and clip your thread tails. Now fold your bag in half right sides together and align the side seam, and also align your two top casings. And you're going to backstitch at the beginning, and you'll be sewing a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Just double check that your little top bands do line up though. I also recommend that you backstitch right there as well. When you get toward the bottom, just do a nice slight curve and repeat the same process on the other side. You can even fold over the first curve and kind of lay it on the second curve to kind of get an idea where it's going to land. Now I always recommend on a mesh bag to have a rounded corner, so that way the sand doesn't get caught in the corners. Now we're going to set our machine up for a zigzag to help prevent the fraying of that cotton woven material at that top band. I set mine up for a zigzag with my width at 6 and my length at 0.5 millimeters. And I'm only doing the zigzag over where the top band is because quite honestly the mesh piece of material doesn't need to be finished. With a pair of fabric shears, just cut the corner mesh pieces out and turn your bag right side out. And now it's time to do a little pressing so that we can set all of the seams. It's time now to insert our drawstring. So whether you're using a cording like I am or ribbon, either way you're going to need a bodkin. There's lots of different bodkins on the market. This is one of the oldest and honestly one of my favorites. You're going to start from one of the sides by feeding in one piece of your either ribbon or cording, and then you're going to poke it out through the other side. And now we're going to go to the other side and feed it into the second casing. So now you have your two raw edges that you're going to connect and tie a knot. Now I really liked the cording because it kind of looks like a nautical rope, and then on the ends I just kind of loosened it up and frayed it out. You're going to repeat the same process, but this time we're going to go in from the other direction. And this way, when you pull each of the draw cords, they will pull into one another. And just like before, you're going to connect the two raw ends together and tie a knot. And if you used a cording like I did, you can fray them out. If you used ribbon, you could cut them on a 45-degree angle, and you might even want to use a little fray block or fray stop or a seam sealant of sorts. And that's it, sewing bees. You have just created a perfect drawstring mesh bag, which is ideal for the summer. I designed this so that it would perfectly hold some flip-flops because we always take these to the beach. And last but not least is probably my favorite, and that is the beach towel tote. You are going to need one beach towel, which mine measured 36 inches wide by 68 inches long, or 92 centimeters wide by 172 centimeters long. You will also need a front and a lining out of cotton, 16 inches by 16 inches or 40 centimeters by 40 centimeters. And lastly, you will need 1 inch wide belting, and you're going to need 72 inches of that or 182 centimeters. Place your front and lining cotton pieces right sides together, and you're going to be stitching along the top and bottom seam. Sew at that top and bottom with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and backstitch at the beginning and the end, and cut your thread tails. Press each of those seams flat. And now turn your pocket right side facing out, and you're going to do what I call the roly-poly, which is trying to align the actual seam and making sure the seam allowance is tucked inside. And you're going to give the top and bottom a good press. Now grab your beach towel and decide which of the short ends you're going to use as your primary bag. Now I got really lucky and I found this super cool sunburst pattern on one end, and the other end was just rather plain, so I'm going to use the sunburst end. We're going to fold it in half widthwise, and we're going to place a couple of straight pins. Now grab your pocket, and you're going to want to decide which side you want to be the outside and which side you want to be the lining. And you're going to want to place the lining side, in my case is going to be this brown, you're going to be placing that right side up. So find the center and align the center with the center of your towel. And you're going to put straight pins along the two sides. and what would be the bottom of the tote bag. Now head to your sewing machine and you're going to be stitching with a 1/2 inch seam allowance on those 2 raw edge sides and along the bottom, which is the finished edge. When you're finished, just backstitch and clip your thread tails. Now that you're finished stitching, you can really see where the sides and the bottom of your tote bag are going to be, and grab that belting and you're going to be placing it all the way on one side and up and over to the other. Just fold under about a 1/2 inch or so of the raw edge of one of the ends of the belting, and you're going to be placing the belting centered over that raw edge, and place some straight pins going through all the layers. Now very carefully smooth out the top, which would be the strap, and make sure that it's going to be laying nice and flat. And again, same thing as the other side, we're going to be folding it about a 1/2 inch underneath to begin with, and then all the way up the side seam. You'll also notice that my straight pins are facing toward the center of the tote bag, whereas the head of the pin is on the outside. This is going to make it a lot easier when I'm stitching. Now go back to your sewing machine and we are going to be sewing a top stitch through all the layers on either side of the belting, only on the side seams. So begin at the top and backstitch and stitch all the way down with about 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the belting through all layers. When you get to the bottom, you're going to just simply sink your needle, rotate your material, do it again in the next corner, and keep stitching that 1/8 of an inch all the way on the other side of the belting. When you get to the very end, you're going to stitch across back and forth along that top portion to help secure the tote bag top. And you're going to repeat the same steps on the other side seam. And when you're finished, clip your thread tails and let's go fold this bag up because you are all finished with your stitching. All right, so now you've got all your stitching finished, and now I'm going to show you how to actually get the towel inside the tote and so that this is also a functioning tote bag. I usually flip it to the wrong side and fold the towel on top of itself into thirds, and then on the right side you're going to just turn your tote bag right side out, which is going to reveal what essentially is the outside of your tote bag. And then poke out the corners. And now you just got to get the towel inside your tote, which is super easy. Just basically fold the towel on top of itself a couple of times and tuck it inside the tote. Now what's really cool about the beach towel tote is that it's going to hold your towel real convenient for you when you go to the beach or the pool, and it's also a tote bag so that you can put other things inside of it, like my flip-flops. And there you go, Sewing Bees, your beach towel tote is all finished. Well, I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you found value, please do give me a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. And until I see you next time, I hope you have a creative day. Bye-bye!